Today, we are going to uncover all of the secrets of the Egyptian pyramids. Why, when, and who built them. And we will reveal controversial topics such as their perfect astronomical alignment, or how they could lift such heavy stone blocks. In this video, you'll discover astonishing aspects of the pyramids, accompanied by impressive virtual recreations. I invite you to immerse yourself in an epic journey through ancient Egypt. Welcome to the secrets of the Egyptian pyramids. The Egyptian pyramids have fascinated us for thousands of years. They awed figures from antiquity like Julius Caesar, or in more recent times, Napoleon Bonaparte. Why were they built, and what is their origin? To answer this question, we must understand the mindset of ancient Egyptians regarding death. Concern for the afterlife led the ancient Egyptians to practice mummification and pay great attention to burials. Initially, tombs were simple structures called mastabas, but over time, these became larger and more elaborate. Depending on the wealth of each family, mastabas could be made of adobe, a mixture of mud and straw, or even better, stone. At their upper part, mastabas often had a small chapel to honour the deceased, but the most significant features were underground. Beneath the ground, a virtual tunnel was dug, providing access to a small funerary chamber. Ropes would be lowered down, and the deceased, along with their belongings, such as jewellery and clothing, would be placed inside. Subsequently, the undertakers would ascend, and the access would be sealed by filling the tunnel with rocks. However, it was a man named Imhotep, the architect of Pharaoh Yauza from the 3rd dynasty, who conceived the idea of the pyramids. Imhotep was a highly talented individual who held many important roles in Egyptian society, including architect, vizier, administrator, high priest, sculptor, chief of carpenters, and physician. He is considered a sage in ancient Egyptian culture and came to be deified. Imhotep began by designing a traditional mastaba, which he not only expanded once, but twice. Later, as the visionary he was, he decided to add a masterful touch. What if he stacked one mastaba on top of another, each one smaller than the previous? That's how he built Egypt's first stepped pyramid, with 4 large steps. If all of these modifications weren't enough, he continued to innovate and order new expansion, making it even larger, reaching a height of 60 meters. The structure, known as the stepped pyramid, is one of the most studied, and all of these expansions have been confirmed through archaeological research. The interior of the pyramid is equally astonishing, as it is a labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, storerooms, and galleries. Pharaoh Yauza's tomb was excavated 28 meters deep, and the ceiling of the first burial vault featured reliefs of 5-pointed stars. Imhotep adorned parts of the chambers with blue faience tiles and door frames with inscriptions. These chambers, known as the blue chambers, had ceilings that mimicked a starry firmament. Yet, this complex network of tunnels, many of which seem to lead to nowhere in particular, appears to be the result of the continuous experiments ordered by Imhotep, seeking the best way to achieve resurrection for eternal life. Imhotep's work was truly impressive, encompassing a 15-hectare complex with numerous splendid buildings such as pavilions, courtyards, chapels, terraces, temples with beautiful columns and altars. The entire complex was surrounded by a 1.5 kilometer wall, standing 10.5 meters tall and designed in an architectural style known as palace facade, with carefully sculptured simulated bastions and doors. This funerary monument left such an impression that from then on, the rest of the pharaohs ordered the construction of their own. Sekhemkhet was the next, followed by Kaba, but it was Snefru who took construction a step further. As you have seen, the following pyramids, built with small stones, did not survive in the long term. However, Snefru didn't order the construction of just one pyramid, but 3. The first of them was the so-called Medium Pyramid, which is now partially ruined. He conceived it as a stepped pyramid made of stone, but at some point he wanted to go further and ordered the structure to be covered with small mud bricks, creating the first proper pyramid-shaped structure. However, the outer covering, made of weak mud brick, eventually deteriorated over the centuries. What survives today is the only inner stepped pyramid made of stone. At its base, there are large amounts of sand that were mud bricks thousands of years ago. But Snefru had a very long life and devoted tremendous effort to ensure his resurrection. For some unknown reason, he ordered the construction of a second pyramid, known as the Bent Pyramid. Listen carefully, as this curious shape resulted from a construction mistake. The pyramid was initially built with a 54-degree inclination, which would have resulted in a very tall pyramid. However, midway through the construction, structural issues arose and cracks appeared. It seemed obvious that the pyramid was too narrow for the projected height, so a bold solution was chosen to reduce the angle, resulting in a shorter pyramid. When finished, the pyramid reached a height of 105 meters and retained a unique and curious shape unlike any other in Egypt. It is often referred to as the Bent Pyramid or Rhomboidal Pyramid. But since Snefru wouldn't pass away and he enjoyed experimenting with pyramids, his architects planned a third pyramid. This one, known as the Red Pyramid, because the limestone used has a slightly reddish colour, and this one indeed has the traditional shape we all know. Eventually, or finally, Snefru passed away and was succeeded by Khufu, who erected the Great Pyramid of Giza. Throughout history, this pyramid has been a source of great interest, mainly due to its enormous size and apparent perfection, although we'll now see that it's not entirely flawless. Since ancient times, many people have sought answers about its origin and construction. There are various theories about it, including the belief that it wasn't built by the ancient Egyptians, but by extraterrestrial beings or technologically advanced ancient civilizations. Humans have tended to consider mysteries and supernatural phenomena of that which they cannot explain. Some believe that the ancient Egyptians didn't have the means to construct a pyramid of such magnitude, but the exact method they used is still not known. Nevertheless, there is ample evidence to demonstrate that the Great Pyramid was indeed built by the Egyptians. And when it comes to those seeking answers involving aliens, there is a hint of racism within, as this meme perfectly illustrates. If the supposed builders were light-skinned, there's no doubt it was them, as they possess significant architectural knowledge. But if the supposed builders were dark-skinned, it's deemed impossible for them to have done it on their own. They must have come from another planet to help. Because of course, being dark-skinned and intelligent are incompatible, right? The renowned historian Herodotus visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE. He attributed the construction of the pyramid to Khufu and depicted him as a cool despot who oppressed his people to achieve it. He claimed that the pyramid had been built using thousands of slaves. However, this portrayal is not accurate, as Khufu was not a cruel king, and it is not necessary to believe that he oppressed his people to build the pyramid. Although Khufu's body was not found in the pyramid, and his sarcophagus was empty when discovered, there is compelling evidence to show that the pyramid belongs to him. To begin with, it's important to note that when archaeological excavations began in the 19th century, all the pyramids had already been looted. No jewellery or mummies were found inside any of them. Tomb raiders had emptied and unrolled the mummies outside to burn them, stealing all of the jewellery. In 1837, a British colonel named Howard Vyse, along with his engineer Perring, explored the Great Pyramid in search of a secret room they believed was connected to an air shaft in the king's chamber. To find it, Vyse accessed a chamber in the ceiling and used dynamite to create a passage to the top. There, he discovered the relieving chambers, 5 superimposed chambers that distribute the weight of the entire structure. Although Vyse didn't find the room he was looking for, he made a significant discovery that cleared all doubts about who the pyramid belonged to. In the chamber, he found the name of the pharaoh, Khufu, written in ochre ink on the stone blocks. Some individuals have attempted to deny this discovery, claiming that the inscriptions are forgeries, but this is unsustainable. Firstly, before Vyse, no one had entered the chamber since its construction 4,300 years prior. Secondly, the inscriptions are drawn on the heaviest blocks of the pyramid, some weighing up to 40 tons, which must have been placed before the structure was completed. And thirdly, alongside the king's name, the names of the work crews who placed the blocks are found, along with dates inscribed on some of them. Additionally, in 1954, an impressive solar boat was discovered buried very close to the pyramid. When it was excavated, the name of Khufu's heir, Geohistory, was found inscribed on the plates that covered the boat. As the successor to his father's throne, he was responsible for burying him. This explains why he wrote his name on the slabs that sealed the solar boat, which transported his father's mummified body. The Great Pyramid occupies an approximate area of 5 hectares. Its sides measure 230.33 meters, with just a 2 centimeter difference between them. In the past, it reached a height of 146.7 meters, although nowadays it's lower by 9.4 meters due to some stone blocks having fallen over time. Moreover, the pyramidion, the small pyramid-shaped piece that crowned the pinnacle and was made of electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, was stolen many, many centuries ago. The corners of the pyramid form right angles and are levelled with great precision. They are oriented towards the cardinal points, north, south, east and west. And here is where the theories about aliens start, with people claiming that achieving such precise alignment was impossible. This is untrue. To determine true north, you can simply watch the sun rise and see where it sets, and true north lies just in the middle, as simple as that. From there, the other cardinal points can be calculated, but if this method doesn't convince you, there's another. You can construct a simple circular wall of mud and observe the North Star as it rises and sets. Again, true north lies right in the middle. To us, it might seem impossible, but that's because we are urban dwellers living in an industrialized civilization, constantly connected to electricity, light, and rarely observing the sky. The Egyptians or Sumerians already knew things such as the year lasting 365 days, or they could predict solar and moon eclipses. It was possible because they observed the sky for thousands of years and recorded the cycles. However, we, who no longer rely as much on nature, rarely look to the sky. Or would you know right now as you're watching this video what phase the moon is in? Or would you have to look it up? Most likely you'd need to search online because we no longer gaze at the sky, and even if we want to, light pollution prevents us from doing so. There are other alternative theories to the ones mentioned earlier. Some suggest that the pyramids represent the 3 stars of Orion's belt, that they are built following the golden ratio, aligned with Stonehenge, or fit the curvature of a rainbow. All it takes is imagination and a bit of Photoshop to manipulate the data. Look at it, I'm going to come up with some crazy data. You know that 6 and 4 make up a face? Well, I could say they align with 6 and 4. I could also take a triangle and claim they are triangulated with, I don't know, my vacations hotel and the Kremlin in Moscow. Or I throw in some random numbers and say they match the pattern of the like button, while their base aligns with the subscribe button. But seriously, if you're enjoying the video, give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to click on the notifications bell. If you're really enjoying the video, you could even leave a super thanks. Donations are fundamental to keeping the channel running. These videos are long, elaborate, and need a lot of research and production to see the light, so any help is welcome. Thank you very much. Anyway, the internet is full of nonsense, manipulations, and shit from people who are looking for some attention. So don't try and complicate things. The pyramids are what they are, just gigantic tombs of the pharaohs. For the construction of the pyramid, it's estimated that around 2.3 million stone blocks were used, with an average weight of 2 tons. Although there are much heavier blocks, like those at the base that can weigh up to 15 tons, or those in the relieving chambers that exceed 50 tons. In the nearby quarries, you can see the marks from the excavation, reaching a depth of 30 meters. It's calculated that about 2.7 million cubic meters of stone were extracted. And here comes the next point of conspiracy theories. it's impossible to move such large blocks. Well, in this recreation of the movement of a megalith made by the University of Granada, Spain, you can see that using rollers, you don't need a lot of people to move a gigantic stone block. And the reality is that in the pyramids, there were very few blocks of such size. The few of them were mainly in the relieving chamber. It was certainly a challenge to move them, a real feat. But come on, they were the fucking Egyptians. They did things like this. Like this. And like this. They were definitely capable of organising themselves to move a handful of gigantic blocks for the relieving chamber. The rest of the blocks are lighter. As we can see in these photos, they are large and heavy, but they weigh around 2.5 tons, which is about 2,500 kilograms, a weight similar to an SUV loaded with 5 people. Is it heavy? Yes. But is it impossible to move? No. Furthermore, as you ascend, the rocks gradually become smaller. In this video, where a guy illegally climbs the Great Pyramid, you can see that the rocks in the upper area are much smaller than those in the lower area. Smaller rocks are easier to transport upwards. We also have this old photo, which is just crazy because I don't understand anything. Someone please explain to me where they got these tables and this chair. I need another explanation for why these two individuals are in swimsuits. I also need to know why this carpet is there. And most importantly, what is this dude lying down like a seal being fed at the zoo? Too many questions and too few answers. This is a mystery and not the alien stuff. Okay, let's get back to the topic. We can also see here that at the very top, the stones are much smaller than in the lower area. And this leads us to the big question: how were the pyramids built? There is no doubt that the pyramids were built by the ancient Egyptians, and it has been proven that the workers who built them were compensated. They were not slaves. Due to their colossal size, it was initially believed that slaves worked on them. But everything changed when the workers' city was unearthed, a massive complex of houses where the workers lived for decades. The remains have shown that the workers were well fed and received wages. Inscriptions were found on their tombs in which they expressed pride in their work. Now there is no doubt that they were genuine construction professionals. However, how exactly the pyramids were built remains a topic of debate, especially the movement of large blocks in the larger pyramids. The truth is, the Egyptians were a bit tricky because they left behind many writings and they depicted thousands of daily life scenes, but so far we haven't discovered any explicit explanations from them regarding the pyramids. Perhaps it's because the topic was so sacred that they didn't find it appropriate to illustrate. Or maybe they did, and those records have been lost. Because it's important to consider that only a very small percentage of the paintings and papyri made 5,000 years ago have survived until nowadays. The first question we can raise is where they obtained so many stones to build the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, which is estimated to have a volume of 2.6 million cubic meters. The answer lies in the excellent organisation and planning of the ancient Egyptians, as most of the quarries were located near the pyramid plateau, just about 300 meters away. Basically, here was the quarry, and also here was the pyramid. Around 99% of the rock came from this area. The Great Pyramid was covered with white limestone rock, which came from the quarries of Tura and Mokattam. on the other side of the Nile. This posed a greater challenge, but in essence we can see that the distance was quite small, only about 25 kilometers in a straight line. In this modern recreation, we can see that quite heavy rocks can be transported in quite small boats. The biggest challenge was transporting the large granite blocks for the burial chambers. While not much granite was used, the few blocks that were very large and came from a distant quarry in Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers away. The transportation was done by placing the large stone blocks on boats, which were allowed to be carried downstream by the river's current. However, the challenge lay in how these blocks were loaded and unloaded. We don't have the exact details, but they likely used wooden cranes or a similar system to load and unload these blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons. And you know what? Just in case you're still skeptical about the feasibility of all this, let's look at the Romans. They ultimately used ropes and wooden cranes to move the heaviest loads. They managed to take several gigantic obelisks from Egypt. The largest of them weighs, get this, 455 tons. They were able to lay it down from its original position, take it to the shore, mount it on a boat, cross the Mediterranean, unload it, transport it to Rome, and erect it. And there it stands today, 2,000 years later, in the Piazza di San Giovanni Laterano in Rome. So, if the Romans, using essentially the same materials, could achieve such an astonishing feat with 455 tons, why wouldn't the Egyptians be able to move 80? Yes. The explanation is in the meme. Bruh. The next concern would be to determine how much workforce was required to carry out a project of such magnitude. Taking the Pyramid of Khufu as an example, the largest of them all. According to Herodotus, the work took 20 years, which is plausible since Khufu resigned for 23 years. It is estimated that around 25,000 workers were needed, as a larger number would have caused issues at the construction site. It's known for certain that teams of 2,000 men were formed, divided into groups of 1,000 and then into 5 groups of 200, and finally into 20 teams of 10 people. It has been calculated that if workers worked 10 hours a day, they would need to place around 340 blocks daily, which would require around 1,300 workers in the quarry. It has also been demonstrated that 3 men can move a 1-ton stone on a surface lubricated with water, and 12 men can easily drag a 2-ton block mounted on a sled up an ascending ramp. And here we come back to the point that the Egyptians didn't describe how they moved the stones, but we found evidence. On one hand, a wooden sled has miraculously survived, and we know that Egypt doesn't get snow, so it wasn't exactly for sledding in the snow, was it? This painting has been found showing several teams pulling ropes to move a giant statue, and the statue is mounted on a sled. Wait. Does that mean they also created sledges even if they had no snow? Indeed, it's most likely that they placed rocks on the sled to move them. Another point in the wild theories about extraterrestrials is that the base of the pyramid is very flat, something impossible for the Egyptians to achieve. Well, we bring up the meme once again and explain how this could have been accomplished. Bruh. With a simple lever or plumb bob like this, you can measure if the base is completely flat. But if this doesn't convince you because the surface is too large and the plumb bob can accumulate errors, there's another more laborious but even more accurate method. A giant grid is drawn and water is let in. This way you have a flat surface and anything protruding above the water is cut away, achieving absolute flatness. Some believe that with the limited tools they had, the ancient Egyptians could not effectively work with stone. Even though they knew about bronze, they hadn't learned to work with iron yet. The drawback of bronze is that it's less hard than iron and wears out much faster, so tools don't last as long if used for cutting and polishing stone. However, there's evidence that they used quartz sand to cut the stone. Essentially, they used a bronze saw, but they introduced quartz sand into the groove. The saw moved the quartz sand back and forth, and it was actually the sand's friction that cut the stone. Look, this is the Mohs scale, which measures the hardness of materials based on their resistance to scratching or abrasion. Materials with a hardness of 1 are the least hard and can be scratched with a fingernail, like talc. And at 10, we have the hardest materials, those that are almost impossible to scratch, like diamond, which can only be scratched by another diamond. Well, limestone has a hardness of 3 and bronze has a hardness of 4. Yes, it's harder. And thus, bronze can scratch and cut limestone. But being only slightly harder, it wears out quickly. However, quartz has an incredible hardness of 7, so using quartz sand significantly enhances the results, making it much easier to cut the rock. The final big question is, how did they move the blocks to the top? The Egyptians didn't know about the pulley, so they couldn't use it. Thus, it's most logical that they used ramps. And here, there are 2 main theories. One involves a single large ramp made of mud brick and sand. This ramp would increase in size as it reached the top. It's the simplest theory, but it has the drawback that, to maintain a constant slope to the top, the ramp's volume would end up being bigger than that of the pyramid itself. The other theory talks about narrower ramps attached to the sides of the pyramid. However, this presents a major problem at the corners, since the ropes would rub against the corner blocks and the sleds wouldn't turn properly. Even though they didn't know about pulleys, they could have used levers for the stones in the upper area, lifting the final row of blocks without needing the ramp to reach all the way to the actual summit. Regardless of the method used, these ramps, made of simple mud brick and sand, would have been dismantled and spread around the surroundings, making them impossible to identify today. With the construction questions answered, let's talk about their purpose. The pyramid was considered a sacred place where the king could ascend to the heavens to meet the stellar gods. Furthermore, they were linked to the ancient solar rites of Heliopolis. It was a city where the sacred Benben stone was located, representing the primordial hill where life began. This stone had a conical shape and is believed to have been a meteorite. It was seen as a symbol of solar rays, as a creative principle. The pyramids were associated with it, with the belief that the sun's rays took on its shape when materializing. It's not surprising that intact tombs haven't been found inside the pyramids, as these monuments had been looted in antiquity. However, it's not true that there's no evidence that the pharaohs were buried in the pyramids. Inside the chambers, many remains have been discovered that clearly show that burials took place there, including the mummies of the individuals interred there. It's easy to imagine the amount of treasures that the pyramids must have held in their day, and how tomb raiders dedicated themselves to looting them over time, not even respecting the body of the deceased king. In their quest to find valuable objects, they would tear apart the embalmed body in search of valuable amulets that were often placed within the mummy's wrappings, leaving the remains scattered throughout the chambers. This is the discovery that the first explorers and scientists encountered when entering some pyramids. Human remains scattered in the funerary chambers due to ancient looting. Much has been written about the opening quotation marks mysterious close quotation marks fact that the Great Pyramid has 3 burial chambers. Well, this is not that much of a mystery. Sometimes they are referred as the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, but it's not true that the Queen was buried there. In fact, around the large pyramids, there's a series of smaller pyramids. This is where queens or other relatives of the pharaohs were buried. They had their pyramids, but they weren't living gods, so their constructions weren't as majestic. Let's return to the Great Pyramid. When it was constructed, the concept of pyramids was quite novel, and experimentation was ongoing. Remember that in the stepped pyramid, the tomb was beneath the pyramid. In the bent pyramid, there are 2 chambers, between the subsoil and just below the surface. Or in the red pyramid, it's once again aligned with the surface. The most likely scenario is that Khufu was still searching for the most suitable location. Most likely, initially, he planned to create an underground chamber, but he abandoned the idea in favour of building one above the surface. Finally, he changed his mind again to elevate it even higher and make it more majestic. By the way, these tunnels, which you can access by paying an entrance fee, are quite narrow and they didn't have traps. No gigantic ball to crush you, no pits filled with snakes, no arrows shooting out from the walls, nothing like that. Simply tunnels that, at most, were blocked at the end with a large rock to simulate that you couldn't continue further. But nothing more. If you've seen traps in movies or cartoons, I'm afraid to tell you, they are all lies. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is built next to 2 more pyramids which were erected later, those of Khafre and Menkaure. The Pyramid of Khafre has a single chamber built at ground level, and the Pyramid of Menkaure once again has one underground. As you can see, the pharaohs were experimenting, constantly changing the location, trying to find what, according to their beliefs, was the most appropriate place. Crumble Khufu must have been the most uncertain of them, constructing 3 spaces and finally deciding on the upper one. Returning to the topic of aliens helping to build the pyramids, we need some perspective. Indeed, these 3 pyramids are impressive, and it's astonishing that they still stand 5,000 years later. But let's think. Essentially, a solid rock pyramid is the most indestructible form that exists. If they were cubes, there would be a risk that the corners would crumble. Or if they were hollow, there would be a risk of collapsing. But a solid pyramid is the most stable structure because it's very difficult for the rocks to crumble. Do you want to see something really complicated? A medieval cathedral. The Pyramid of Khufu is 139 meters tall and is a solid, indestructible structure that has stood for 5,000 years. However, just as an example, the Amiens Cathedral is only slightly shorter, reaching 112 meters, and it's been standing for 800 years. It's much more complex to build and more challenging to withstand the passage of time. Why? Because it's hollow. It's not a structure of solid rock. Its walls are thin, and it has enormous stained glass windows. It is truly awesome that they could erect something like this with medieval technology. It didn't collapse, and it can endure the centuries. Of course, it is not a rare example. There are dozens and dozens of gigantic medieval cathedrals like this, and nobody suggests that these medieval cathedrals were built by aliens. Why? Here's the answer. Bruh. Let's go back to Egypt. The reality is that, despite their robustness, very few pyramids have survived almost intact. At the end of the 6th dynasty, the Old Kingdom came to an end, and a period of uncertainty and conflict swept over Egypt. This period, known as the First Immediate Period, didn't mark the end of pyramid construction, as some pharaohs continued building them despite the country's political instability. But they became smaller constructions. During the Middle Kingdom, many of these pyramids were built with smaller stones and adobe mortar to fix the blocks, which has caused the rocks to become dislodged and shift due to lack of maintenance. In other cases, to save costs, the core was made of adobe and then covered with stone, which in the long run also led to their ruin. The pyramids were subjected to systematic looting over centuries. When Egyptian religion fell into obscurity, the pyramids became a massive quarry with precious, perfectly cut stone blocks readily available. The Arabs used the pyramids as quarries to obtain good stone. Many of the ancient buildings and mosques we see in Cairo are constructed from pyramid materials. While the Great Pyramids in Giza have barely been affected, the same cannot be said for the rest of these monuments, which were built with adobe bricks. Stripped of the limestone layer that protected them for centuries, they eventually crumbled. Most of them are now large mounds of sand and rock in a complete state of ruin. Finally, it was during the New Kingdom period that these monuments ceased to be tombs for the kings of Egypt. Ahmose, the first pharaoh of this dynasty, built his pyramid in Abydos, but no more were constructed. Tomb raiders plundering the Great Pyramids during these periods of civil war likely played a significant role in their abandonment. After all, a pyramid is a massive signal saying, "Rob me, the great pharaoh with a heap of riches is buried here." From that point on, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom abandoned the ancient tradition and chose to be buried in the Valley of the Kings, a much more protected and even concealed location, nested amongst deep gorges. This is where Tutankhamun's tomb was found, almost intact. But that's a topic for another video. Interestingly, The use of pyramids as burial sites didn't disappear. It was taken up by common people who built small brick pyramids at the entrances to their tomb or near chapels. To see the pyramids as they were when they were first built, we would have to travel back in time about 4,500 years. At that time, they would have been freshly finished with perfectly polished white limestone faces. Their appearance must have been breathtaking. Imagine the effect of the sun's rays reflecting off them like mirrors. The pharaoh would travel in his sacred boat to unite with the sun and be seen as God. If they were already impressive today, imagine how they must have been when they were first intact, still covered in the final layer of white limestone, gleaming under the desert sun. It must have been a heart-stopping sight, a view that reaffirmed to the Egyptians that their pharaoh was a living god and that they had to assist him in his journey to the afterlife. At this point, we've seen what the pyramids were like, why they were built, and how they were constructed. If you've made it this far, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, click on the notification bell and let us know that you like the video. We'll be uploading more videos related to ancient Egypt, as well as geography and history. Thank you very much and greetings.